Death metal. The genre you want to listen to in thrash metal isn't heavy enough and black metal is, well, that. For nearly 40 years, the sound of death metal has been heard around the world, and has evolved since its conception, being one of the most well-known genres in extreme music. Much like every weird thing in this world, death metal hails from a magical place called Florida, but first let's take a detour across the pond for a quick history lesson on extreme music, where three guys from Newcastle, England released an album in 1981. Welcome to Hell is an album by Venom, a band that spearheaded extreme music. As compared to heavy metal music in the 1970s, Venom took their musical content to the extreme and disturbed listeners with their occult lyrical themes, harsh vocals, and fast playing. The release of Welcome to Hell marked Venom as one of the pioneers of black metal and extreme metal in general. Now going back to the swamp, in 1983 we can find a young boy named Chuck Schuldiner handing out demo tapes for his band Death. Upon listening, several members of the underground extreme metal scene grew to like his music because of the unique, heavy sound he managed to create. The popularity of sound influenced a future of similar sounds, christening Schuldiner as the godfather of death metal. In 1987, Death released their first studio album, Scream Bloody Gore, under Combat Records. While they were signed with a company in New York, the brothers at Morrisound Studios in Tampa, Florida were responsible for recording the most popular death metal bands in history and bringing the genre to the mainstream. Examples include Death, Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, and Obituary. So that is a quick rundown of the history of death metal's conception, but I obviously forgot one important detail: the music. What really prompted my idea to cover this topic came from a tweet by former Cannibal Corpse vocalist Chris Barnes, who went on a temper tantrum about the current state of death metal on Twitter. I can't find an original screenshot of the tweet because he's a man-child who can't handle criticism, but the tweet read, "I just watched a death metal podcast on YouTube that was done about a week ago with the top death metal vocalists. It made me physically ill. I despise what this genre has become. How can a genre like death metal evolve? It is quite obvious that death metal has a unique sound based on what has been playing in the background. The main characteristics of death metal include growling, shouting, or guttural vocals, tremolo-picked guitars and bass, blast beat drums and double bass, minor keys, harmonic ambiguity and atonality, and then artwork and lyrics depicting death, nihilism, violence, horror, and the occult. Not every death metal band or song is bound to these rules, but it's what's most common in death metal music. What I plan on doing for the rest of this video is provide a loose timeline of the evolution of death metal sound throughout the years. The music performed by bands like Death, Autopsy, and Morbid Angel is the standard for the classic death metal sound that was established in the early 1980s. But what if I told you it could get heavier? Following in the footsteps of 1980s death metal, several bands wanted to continue to push the boundaries of what the genre truly meant. The early 1990s spawned a range of new sounds of death metal. The established genre was a way to unleash frustrations at the world in a musical context. But when we approach the subgenre of brutal death metal, things begin to change. The vocals became less intelligible, and the music was less organized in terms of song structure. The lyrics that were given depicted violence, gore, and misanthropy, like a horror movie. While several bands are noted for establishing the genre, it was Cannibal Corpse that brought death metal to new heights. Anyone who has seen Ace Ventura has seen and heard Cannibal Corpse's most popular song, Hammer Smashed Face, as Cannibal Corpse had a cameo in the film. This was one of the reasons for the death metal genre to gain mainstream attention. Cannibal Corpse even made national news when the late US Senator Bob Dole scrutinized their music in a press conference. While the music of brutal death metal is considered to be more violent as compared to classic death metal, the people that are a part of the scene just do it for fun, much like everyone who wants to make music. Even the meaty-necked George Corpse Grinder Fisher is obsessed with Disney and shopping at Target, while being the current vocalist of Cannibal Corpse.
I'm buying these 1,000%, dude. $1.78 from the Warcraft movie. Are you kidding me? I'm buying every one of these. I don't care how much room I have. I'll throw clothes away. I don't care.
Although Cannibal Corpse gets a lot of attention, bands like Suffocation, Aborted, and Cryptopsy are big, brutal death metal acts. Around the same time, the other extreme metal subgenre grindcore was gaining popularity in the United Kingdom, with Napalm Death's rise in the charts. Grindcore is, in layman's terms, thrash metal mixed with punk. I'm not going to go too much into detail because this video essay is meant to be focused on death metal, but grindcore also plays its part in death metal's evolution. There are two subgenres of death metal that came with a fusion of death metal and grindcore: Deathgrind and Goregrind. Some may argue that they belong more with grindcore than death metal, but they share equal rights in my opinion. Deathgrind is the fusion of death metal and grindcore. The difference can be heard in the guitar riffs, wider range of vocals, tempo, and song structure. Decapitation are one of the most well-known Deathgrind bands, and their album Monolith of Inhumanity is a great listen. Their Deathgrind sound formed later in the band's lifespan, as they were originally known as Goregrind in their sound. Carcass are considered to be the first Goregrind band with the release of their 1988 album Reek of Putrefaction, depicting real-life medical gore and lyrics drawn out of a medical dictionary. The name Goregrind is just based on the lyrical content the music contains. The sound of death metal became more complex in the 1990s, and even Death have raised the bar on the technical aspects of their music. This conceived the appropriately named technical death metal or progressive death metal. The biggest difference heard in this subgenre is heard in the instrumental parts. The guitar playing is more virtuosic, and the music itself isn't reliant on a single time signature, which puts more emphasis on the complex drum parts. There may also be the inclusion of keyboards as well. Nocturnus is considered to be the first technical death metal band with their 1990 album, The Key. Other technical death metal bands include Revocation, Atheist, and Opeth. The sound of technical death metal stays consistent throughout the 90s, but then changes during the turn of the century.
This is a dangerous group.
While brutal death metal bands ramped up the speed and complexity of their music, some decided to slow things down and focus on the slamming riffs they played. For example, this is a segment from Suffocation's Liege of Inveracity from their 1991 album, Effigy of the Forgotten. This riffing spawned a new subgenre called brutal slamming death metal, or slam metal for short. Slam metal is basically brutal death metal played in halftime, but with more hip-hop oriented drum parts, palm-muted guitars playing this rhythm continuously, and band members dressing like they're in Limp Bizkit. Another aspect of slam metal is the vocal style, which is even more unintelligible than its parent genre. You can basically just make weird noises into the mic and then write the lyrics after. While Suffocation was credited to being the band to conceive slam metal, devourment was also a factor in making the genre popular. Other bands include Ingested and Guttural Slug. With Carcass being the creators of Goregrind, which was really just a joke amongst the band, their sound evolved into something more serious and melodic. In 1993, they released their album Heartwork, which demonstrated how little Goregrind was left in Carcass. The new sound of Carcass defined the sound of melodic death metal. While still having the established death metal sound, the sound of heavy metal was brought back, with deep songwriting, conventional song structures, and clean vocals. Melodic death metal was actually one of the first metal subgenres I was exposed to, as I fumbled my way through Take This Life by In Flames on Guitar Hero 3. Amon Amarth, Children of Bodom, and Arch Enemy are other notable bands in the melodic death metal subgenre.
Push your care, push your burdens aside, erase everything inside and leave just one thing on your mind.
With the rise of metalcore, a fusion genre of heavy metal and hardcore punk in the 1990s, the early 2000s welcomed a fusion of metalcore and death metal, appropriately named Deathcore, and holds the reputation of being the most disliked subgenre in death metal. The influence of metalcore gives deathcore a more modern sound as compared to the other subgenres discussed. The vocals are usually growls accompanied by cupping the microphone for a more rugged sound, with the inclusion of clean vocals. The music itself is usually fast, but it is then disrupted by a breakdown, which is when the song goes into halftime, and the guitars and voice linger on a single note. With the genre being modern, the recordings are clean, which strays from the raw death metal sound listeners are used to. Why deathcore is disliked by many is above my comprehension, but it really comes down to subjectivity, and everyone is entitled to their own opinions. Antagony is credited to be the band that defined the deathcore sound, but bands like Suicide Silence, Bring Me the Horizon, and Whitechapel are among the most popular. I'm going to wrap up this video by discussing one more notable subgenre of death metal. While there are several genres I haven't even touched, I felt it was more appropriate and time-conscientious to discuss the bigger subgenres that have a greater reputation. Technical death metal bands began to incorporate the sounds of symphonic metal in the 1990s. Haggard's 2000 album, Awaking the Centuries, is considered to be the first symphonic death metal album. The sound of symphonic death metal is, as it's described, symphonic. While staying true to the technical death metal sound, the inclusion of strings, winds, percussion, and choir creates a unique timbre. It is common for symphonic death metal bands to perform live with orchestras, choirs, or chamber ensembles. Alongside Haggard, Flesh God Apocalypse and Septic Flesh are other notable symphonic death metal bands. Well, I think that was 8 subgenres of death metal, and however long this video ended up being. With death metal being such a heavy genre of metal, it's astounding to hear the differences within each subgenre. Looking at death metal in 2022, the genre continues to flourish amongst the several subgenres it has conceived, and I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
Woo!